welcome to the Footy Museum podcast. I'm Maria Van Dyken Lee, and I am joined by co-director of the Footy Museum, Justin Whitty. Hi, Justin.
Hey, Maria, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm okay.
You say that with the Leeds sweatshirt you're wearing and with the appropriate face. It was another tough weekend for a Leeds fan, wasn't it?
As per usual.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this weekend should have been easy. Leeds is playing Forest. We're at the bottom of the table, but I looked at everyone below us and I was like, this is fine. Everyone below us is going to lose. Everton versus Arsenal.
Oh, no chance. Everton's dead in the water.
West Ham versus Newcastle.
Flying Newcastle. All that Saudi money. Yes.
Yeah. Wolves versus Liverpool.
Yeah, and even, Wolves, Liverpool, that's a gimme, right?
Yeah, everything was going to be fine.
Yeah.
We were fine.
Yeah.
So I wake up Saturday.
Could even move up maybe 15?
Yes.
15, maybe even 14?
We were going to soar this weekend.
And the new signings are in. Weston McKennie.
Mm-hmm. All this fresh blood.
The soccer mastermind, Chris Armas, on the sideline. What could go wrong?
Your favorite? It's the first thing I see when I wake up on Saturday morning is Everton 1, Arsenal 0 across the TV screen. And I was like, this not good. And that pretty much set off everything. Everyone who could gain points that I didn't want to gain points, gained points.
Yes.
And
it is cruel. Wolves ended up blowing out Liverpool. West Ham tied with Newcastle. And so now Leeds are just above the drop zone, tied on points with a newly resurgent Sean Dyche Everton.
Oh, and they played pretty well.
They played with a purpose and drive that...
a direction?
I don't know. Hey, maybe they just needed a simple approach that Dyche, or maybe Frank Lampard is actually just a crappy manager. Maybe we can just agree on that at this point.
Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, it was tough, and I think for a lot of us, Leeds United States of America, we have a lot riding on it, and you watch those games and you wonder if they don't make it, if Marsh doesn't make it, is the whole U.S. takeover of the Premier League over? But then you remember, on the flip side, we have players like Tim Ream and Fulham who had an amazing weekend as well. So it's not just Leeds, but there's a lot of stars and stripes over there.
There is. They really went all in on the stars and stripes, which really is not like a priority for me at all. It was just like a fun little.
Do you hate America?
No, don't put words in my mouth.
So you hate the U.S. national team?
I have a global perspective.
Oh, okay. Well, globally, Leeds is in trouble as well.
Yeah, globally.
Well, we were texting and a little as a highlight. I just reassured you that, hey, look, worst case scenario, in 2 years, we get to see Leeds play Wrexham every other week in League One.
America will be happy.
America will be happy.
They'll be thrilled.
And that's really one of the things this week that was stuck in my head is there's this whole debate brewing in U.S. soccer about the popularity of Wrexham AFC. Is it Wrexham AFC or FC?
I do not know.
See, that's how cool we are. We don't fall into your trend. Well,
I watched the show.
The Hollywood-fueled 5th Division team, Welsh team, just outside of the English Pyramid that was bought by 2 Hollywood stars, Ryan Reynolds and the guy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is how most of the media presents it. Sorry, Rob McElhenney. McElhenney. Sorry, you are in the shadow of the Deadpool gin producer, Ryan Reynolds. And there's a lot of tension in U.S. soccer because Wrexham is receiving an exorbitant amount of attention from the media, but also from U.S. soccer fans. I believe that their FA Cup match against Sheffield United was the top. It was the top broadcast match of that weekend in the United States. Now there was no Premier League, there was no MLS. It was international. Was it still international break? But it was the FA Cup.
They were playing and all these other bigger teams were playing that should have been bigger games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were still playing, those bigger teams were playing smaller teams. And I think the FA Cup is just now penetrating. Anyway, it was a huge success. And for a lot of longtime soccer fans like myself and MLS fans, there's like this, hey, what is going on? All of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, this is amazing. What an amazing story. I have family members who have never shown any interest in soccer explaining Pro Rel to me, which is so fun and just how exciting it is. And I just want to like scream. And also in a country where we've been trying to get domestic soccer off the ground for so long, and to get all this attention, I think there's people frustrated. Why don't the media focus on MLS? Now, the argument says, well, it's just not as exciting. The story is not as exciting. And I wonder if that's the football or obviously the TV show or the marketing. Because Ryan Reynolds is a marketing genius.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
part of what he does. So, and I don't know how you feel about this whole debate. I can tell you a little bit more how I feel in a minute.
Too, going back like to the marketing of it all, I heard, now they may need to fact check me on this, that part of the getting into buying a club for the two of them was they saw the Sunderland documentary and were like, let's make this let's do this. Let's make a documentary as a priority before buying the team.
I think my understanding, and again, I apologize, I have not watched the full series, so I'm sure this is common knowledge, but that Rob McElhenney. He's Mac. The lesser of the two famed owners. He came across that this club was for sale and that he needed a partner who could afford it.
Well, that's the story.
That's the story. But it's very clear from the beginning that they had an idea of doing a documentary, and that would be the source. And if they controlled the club, they could control the story. And I think they saw the benefit in the popularity of the show. It's clear now that they've been sucked into the potential of the team. And it seems like now they have more sight on if we actually get this team promoted higher levels, that's a whole different kind of stratosphere of success.
Yeah.
And long-term success in history. It's an interesting story. But it's a story played out over, millions of clubs. And I think the thing that really bugs me, and I think it may be true for a lot of U.S. soccer fans of my generation, is that I came up playing like in the 90s. And before that, like before real organized playing in the 70s, 80s, where soccer in this U.S. was a total desert landscape. It was not considered a real sport. You had to really go to great lengths to watch any sort of international game. And because of that, two things are true. One, I think there was a sense of pride in being in on a secret that the rest of culture didn't know. Do you know what I mean? Because there's this amazing thing. The world loves it. This is how it works. And you guys don't care or know anything about it. And that makes me special, blah, blah, blah. And I also think that it developed a unique soccer culture in the U.S. of not your traditional jock sport fan, right? So there were people, I think, who had more independent tendencies, could find a sport that also gives them kind of the joy and love of sport. And I think that crowd has persisted, and you see it around the U.S. national team and in other ways. And they have always, I think, wanted to support soccer, but to keep it as their own thing as well.
Keep it a little secret.
And in the last 10 years, as the Premier League has really exploded in the U.S., there's some animosity to that, but at least those clubs still have their history and culture, and there's authenticity in the eye of U.S. fans. But then with Ryan Reynolds and the Mac coming in,
McElhenney.
Those to me are very representation of that kind of mainstream culture that is the opposite of what I was talking about. And them coming in with no knowledge and just being like, we'll buy a soccer team and we'll just market it. And then now that they're the top of the conversation, I think wounds a lot of people who've invested time in the sport in the U.S. Now, is that a legit reason not to like it?
I think that makes, well, maybe not to like it, but to feel a little hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. This is, from your perspective, this is interesting because for me, my perspective and how I got into soccer was like, or watching professional soccer. My husband isn't from the U.S. He's from Hong Kong. And so like Jeremy, who, for the record, we have asked to be on this podcast and has refused. Politely declined. So he always watched European soccer growing up, because that's what was popular, where he was. And, so he was like really into peak Barcelona. And, so when I started getting into it, because he was into it, we were always watching Premiere, and like it's like, okay, I'm gonna pick a club, and I'm gonna pick this club because they just got promoted and they're in it now. And then now, of course, it's United States of Leeds, which is an interesting shift for me, even though it was a very brief time before that. But so coming into it as somebody who wasn't invested in MLS, not because I never had any interest, but because my connection was somebody with a different perspective. Hearing you and your perspective, it makes so much sense that having all the hype be around by somebody who wasn't in the niche MLS culture, and then going out and talking about this stuff like they know everything, or being like not talking about it like they know everything. Actually, in the show, they portray themselves as very ignorant, but
it's part of the sell.
But like now they have all of this clout.
Yeah.
And it's without any history.
Like every story about Wrexham, the thumbnail is a picture of Ryan Reynolds. Not even like the real fans, or, I mean, that sums up a lot to me. And I think additionally, for so long, like even when I played, and I think early U.S. men's national teams, there was a very strong sense of us versus the world.
Oh.
And this desire of the U.S. soccer wanting to take root in the United States and have success in the U.S. As its own product. So I think that's very much behind the national team. That was the dreams behind MLS. I think there's some core structural issues with MLS that will always prevent that. But the idea that we could support our own city's clubs and our national team and compete on the national level, and to have this much U.S. success for a tiny Welsh city is also, I think, rubs some people the wrong way. And again, I think it's all silly, the whole debate, because really it's just a show that's popular. People like it.
And it is a fun show.
I'm sure it is. But it's funny, there's a lot of chatter about that. The other thing that happened this week that caught my attention is Apple TV launched its MLS. Oh yeah, did you have something else to say? Oh,
I was going to say, this has to do with MLS too, but Jeremy actually started looking at tickets for Chicago Fire.
Oh!
So now finally.
Fire. Yeah, I love going to Fire games. I think you guys will have a blast, but it's one of those things where there's not the crowds there should be. There's not.
Well, we're going to try and fix that. Yeah. 2 more bodies.
So when you see that excitement for a Welsh team, you're like, why? There's a team
right
in our case, like right in the city. Again, some structural issues we could talk about another time. But it's a fun atmosphere. But that's great. That's great.
And it's like, what's nothing wrong with having your club in England and having your local team too.
But go to a game. And I'll be curious if you guys take advantage of this Apple TV MLS package.
Well, I didn't see that it had been launched because the coverage of Wrexham way outdid the coverage of the Apple TV launch.
The coverage of Wrexham not only overshadowed the launch of the Apple TV MLS package, which is Apple TV now has exclusive rights to all broadcast content for Major League Soccer. And there, if you go to your Apple TV app, at the top, one of the options is MLS. And they have a very robust site with backstories on each club, past reporting, recaps of last season, previews of each team. So there's a lot of money going to it. It's very corporate feeling, but that's kind of MLS in itself. I'll be curious how it goes. But the other thing, the Wrexham story I forgot to mention, overshadowed is all this underdog talk about Wrexham. There was an MLS team in the Club World Cup for the first time in history. Did you know that? And they played this weekend. So the Club World Cup, FIFA Club World Cup, is all the top teams from the different FIFA conferences, and they have a World Cup. It's not taken too serious till like maybe the final game usually. Chelsea are past winners. And they're playing in Morocco, and the Seattle Sounders were the first MLS team to ever win the CONCACAF Champions League, which is like the UEFA Champions League for our region. And they were going there, and should have been a huge deal, like zero awareness. Zero awareness. They ended up losing their first game because they're still in preseason. But I digress. We're not here to talk about these things.
We're not?
Well, any other quick recaps did you watch any other games this weekend?
I caught Harry Kane's 200th Premier League goal.
Oh, that just happened,
just before we started. That was exciting for him.
Don't you feel like he should have a different voice?
I can't even think of what he sounds like.
Oh.
It was just kind of a...
It's real.
Yeah.
It's like you see the way he plays and kind of looks, and you're like, oh, English gentleman voice. And then he has what I assume is one of the most working class British accents, like he's delivering coal, like, oh, I can't even do it. But sorry, Harry Kane. I love you. I think you're a fantastic footballer. But I'm always surprised by your voice. I know you're one of our listeners. So you saw that. That was historic. Another upset, I would say, against
that was
Manchester
an upset.
City.
Yeah. I love an upset. Except for if it has to do with Everton, Wolves, or West Ham, or Leeds and Forest.
That Everton, I enjoyed that Everton game because it was almost like a final game of the season where they were facing relegation. That was the energy level, and after they won, the vibe in the stadium.
They were
was
out of
insane.
the zone for about 3 minutes until in the next game block the Wolves scored really quickly, and then on the live table it was like Everton had gone out of relegation, and then they were back.
Yeah, they got some, but I think if they keep that up, they'll play.
Yeah.
So that was good. Okay, shall we move on? All right, so as you know, each week for an indefinite period of time until we're ready to move on to some other design and football culture aspect of the game, we have decided to choose a different country in the world and then look at their footballing structure and each choose a team from that country and kind of break down their crest. We can choose the team based on a connection, but mostly it's what we can find out and what designs kind of stand out. So to make this really open, and it's exciting because so far I've learned quite a bit, to be honest, is that at the end of each episode, we randomly select a country.
We're spinning the globe.
And what did we end up picking last week?
We spun the globe and we got Serbia.
Woohoo! Oh boy! And was that a complicated sandwich of football?
Yeah, it was.
Now, when we initially chose it, we were looking at some of the crests quickly online.
Yeah,
and they're different.
They're different. They're interesting.
And and you were like saying, I'm excited.
I was excited to talk about it. I'm like, oh, I'm liking these. And then I was like, oh no, I'm not.
And what made you say that?
Well, what I didn't really realize is that there's this really active and loud part of the fan base in Serbia with like far right nationalist views.
Yeah, the ultras. Yeah,
anti-LGBTQIA views and they demonstrations and violence, and so that diminished my excitement.
Yeah, I think that before we start, it's kind of hard to not address some of the complications and darker histories that line up with Serbian football. And I think a good way to start that is, first maybe just give an overview of where the league is. So the Serbian SuperLiga, the Mozart Super League, I think that's their sponsor, has only been around since 2006 and has about 16 teams. And even though it's been only around since 2006, a lot of the teams have been together since the 20s. That's because being a Serbian football league, they were part of the former country of Yugoslavia. So their history is tied in with the very turbulent history of that region of the world. They used to, of course, compete in the Yugoslav First League. That competition was formed in 1923 and lasted until 2003. After the downfall of the former Yugoslavia, in 91, there was briefly another league with the new Yugoslavia that was with Serbia and Montenegro. They kept the name Yugoslavia in the title of that league. It was called, I believe, the Yugoslav Pro League or something like that until 2003. And then the country changed its name to Serbia and Montenegro, but they still kept the name in the league. And that lasted until 2006 when Montenegro gained independence and formed its own league, the Montenegrin First League. So then we have the Serbia SuperLiga. The champions currently are Red Star Belgrade. There's really just two teams, and we're going to talk more in depth about them, that have dominated the league. Red Star and Partizan. UEFA currently ranks the league 11th in Europe of 55 leagues, so the caliber of play is on the higher end. And they have amazing. They have very successful academies, youth academies. There's Serbian players who come through. I know the Partizan Academy, probably Red Star as well, who play all over Europe. Some of the most well-known, Alexander Mitrovic from Tim Ream's Fulham in the Premier League. You may know him. And, of course, Bora Milanovic. I only know him as Bora. I apologize for mispronouncing his last name. But, of course, he's the former Serbian player, and most Americans know him as the U.S. men's national team coach during the pivotal 1994 World Cup. Their national team is ranked number 21 in the world and number 13 in UEFA by FIFA. So again, top half of middle. And that's kind of the overview, right? And that's kind of the overview. Now, I mentioned the not turbulent, but kind of weird history of the league having to change. That's, of course, because it parallels the change in the Balkan regions. And it's impossible to, I think, understand the complexities of football in Serbia without knowing that history a little bit. So sticking to fairly modern history of Serbia, starting when it was part of Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia obviously founded after World War I, when they split up the Austria-Hungarian Empire, when the Allies did. In 1945, after World War II, Yugoslavia became a communist country led by their controversial, potentially tyrannical leader, Tito. In 1963, the country was renamed again as the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia is interesting is that the communist form of the country was very much formed in the model of Russia, and there was an alliance with Stalin, but they quickly separated. So they were still communist, but kind of independent from Russia. Tito, who was their leader, president for life, basically, died in the 1980s, and after he died, despite what he may have done or people viewed, there was something about him and his administration by force of will was kind of keeping this country of very different regions and conflicting ethnic backgrounds together. So after his death, there was a rise in different nationalist tendencies and conflict within the country. And so Yugoslavia began to break up along the borders of the different sections in the country against Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia. I'm screwing this up. Am I right so far? It's a lot of history. Bosnia. So that led, of course, to the Yugoslav wars, which really went from 93 till as recently as 2017. Yeah. There's still conflict. And in my mind, when I think of this region of the world, that history is very front of mind. That was, 97. Sophomore in college, was really becoming aware of global news. And I just remember the scenes from what was going on over there is really impressionable. Not that different from really when the news in Ukraine today. Just the amount of destruction and violence. And I don't think that there's a way that could not leave an imprint on a community. Several political and military leaders from the Yugoslav wars were tried for war crimes, genocide, and other crimes committed during those wars. But through it all, a lot of these football clubs continued to operate at some capacity. And I imagine several of their players were directly involved in or affected by this violence. And the fans most definitely were, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of recent destructive, violent history and disruption can't but stay with a society for a certain amount of time. So then you throw in football, which in its very nature is tribal, is very much about alliance, belonging, choosing a side. And you throw on top of that a lot of ethnic conflict, a lot of trauma, a society that was overly exposed to violence and very strong division. It makes sense logically. I don't think it ever makes sense in terms of it being the correct thing, that there is a violent supporter culture that grows up in parts around it. Yeah. And you mentioned that the hooliganism in Serbian football.
And
yeah, go ahead.
One thing that struck me in researching this was that ever since like the formation of the clubs, that the government gave supporters of the clubs actual power to have like political and like paramilitary influence that they could get away with.
It's crazy. Yeah. But a lot of these clubs like were very tied in with the military in their founding. You can see how the darker side of football, of tribalism, nationalism, and racism can pool in the spot that organized sports creates as kind of a stand-in for conflict, really. And unfortunately, this has happened at different times in Serbia. There are several ultra groups, hooligans, with names such as the Gravediggers, Headhunters, Zulu Warriors, Red Devils, and a lot of them trace their lineage back to the Balkan War of the 90s and are tied in with that conflict in the military. They're renowned for their tough-as-nailed attitude and their kind of love of and seeking out of violence. I mean, in the past, Serbian ultras have killed rival fans, including famously a Toulouse supporter in 2009 who was beaten to death with iron bars and bicycle chains. Of course, there are the well-known events in 2014 when partisan fans unfurled an anti-Semitic banner as they were facing Tottenham in European competition, which is even more jarring considering the history of concentration camps in the Belgrade area. There is the unfortunate event in 2017 when fans taunted a partisan player from Brazil, Everton Luiz, with monkey noises every time he touched the ball throughout a game. The league was sanctioned after both of these events. A lot of these empty stadium European competitions you've seen in the past, pre-COVID, were happening in Serbia. And it's heart-wrenching. So there's a great image of one of the fellow partisan players comforting Everton Luiz, who was on tears on the field because the taunting was so intense. But in that image, for me, you get a sense of, yes, there's this dark side that has appeared in other areas of football. You think about the 80s in England, the hooliganism there, that really destroys a league, can destroy the reputation of a league. It's very hurtful. But then thrown amongst it are players trying to make a career, trying to find a path. I'm sure there are fans and organizers who have histories with these clubs who do not agree with the ultras, but the kind of their voice, because of its aggression, kind of rises to the top. The national team has also had issues, financial improprieties, other issues where they've been binded several times. So it's a choppy history. I don't know. Is that a good enough cover? I mean, I'm sure there's other things going on, but
there was other stuff at the World Cup too.
Oh my! In Russia or this time around?
This time around, the certain Serbian nationalist statements about like Kosovo and use of flags and anti-Albanian stuff.
Yeah, there was. That's right. There was fans bringing basically racist anti-Albanian propaganda into stadiums, and there was accusations that both sides were not treated fairly in those attempts. And I know in the World Cup in Russia, there was a lot of violence from Serbian fans. So it's tricky. And I don't know, I think when we decide to talk about design and culture and history through the lens of football, I think it's because we both maybe are drawn to the more positive sides of that. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to address the tendency for this darker side.
I think for me, when it comes to certain things, certain symbols, I tend to think of some as relics. Like the communist star is in both of our logos that we're going to be talking about.
Yes.
Serbia is no longer communist, but the fact of the matter is that, at least for Red Star, the symbol of the team is still an active symbol and an active thing that people rally around, even though the communist thing that began, it's like it was a political emblem masquerading as a football crest. And that part of it's a relic now, but the logo itself is an active symbol that some people use for far right views.
Yeah. And it's wild how that can be adopted the world over. I mean, if you just look how the Brazilian national team jersey has been adopted by the far right in Brazil. And when I was looking at this issue, and as I mentioned, it has appeared at different times in different places. Our last episode, we talked about briefly a history in British football, where because of the violence and hooliganism in that league, it was suspended from European competition, which is hard to believe now because England is the Super League now. Mm-hmm. They are the top. So I say that with an understanding that there's the potential for it anywhere. You know, I know even in the U.S., in sports, there's a lot of violence between fans. And considering the climate at times here, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a political tinge to certain teams or approaches. And I hope it doesn't happen because that could be pretty awful,
to say the least.
So it's tough, and I hope it changes. Because it really is the first thing that comes to mind when you start researching Serbian football, and it covers up a lot of interesting history. There's a lot of great players that have come out of the country, and I'm sure that there are stories, normal community stories that have surrounded these teams in the past that aren't so dark. But we have to address that before we just talk about the design. And I think more of it will come up in the design. And as we mentioned, there's really just two teams where there's a lot of deep information about, and that's Red Star and Partizan. And I've just been talking a lot. So I think we're going to start, and you're going to talk about Red Star Belgrade.
So the team that I covered for today is Red Star Belgrade. They are pretty much the dominant team. Yeah,
when you look at league winners, they are very well represented.
Yeah, they are it. So they got their start after World War II in 1945, and they were formed after the new communist government dissolved basically every old team. Like there had been teams playing during the German occupation. They dissolved those. They dissolved anyone who didn't ideologically align with the new communist government. So they kind of took the old pieces and put them back together, and Red Star Belgrade was formed from the resources of the former SK Yugoslavia club. So they had been known as the Reds, and they played in red and white. And so that's kind of where they got their visual identity.
Ooh, clever.
Yeah.
Not the Reds as in the commies?
Well, I think it worked out for them, right? Because they really leaned into the whole the communist vibe with the design. So the original design, the crest is a circular shape with a wide red border and an orange center. And then within that circle, there's a red communist star that's laid over top of the orange, with the bottom 2 points are resting on top of the red border, and the top 3 points of the star are protruding from the top of the circle.
So it's almost like it's rising out of that
yeah,
circle.
it's like rising out of like this red sun.
Red dawn.
Yeah. And then in front, that's kind of the background for this figure, this human figure that's orange and brown, like the background, with its arms stretched out, and it's kind of like almost this Da Vinci type.
It reminds me of like a Russian space program logo.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah, very much like this.
Like a non-gendered human figure spread across. Yeah.
Yeah. So it either has like, these kind of like Russian-y government human achievement vibes. Also this like very like athletic sports person vibe, like a little action figure.
So like in the 1980s Hollywood movie, the illegal sports complex in Russia that was making cyborg athletes would have this logo.
This is the guy.
This is the logo there now. Yeah.
And then in Cyrillic, it's written Kraven Zvezda.
Oh, beautiful. I dare say that your Cyrillic pronunciation's better than your Italian.
Oh, it might be. I'm so sorry to all the Serbian speakers out there. That translates to Red Star, which I will be referring to it from here on out as such.
So that's the first one.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
And that only lasted for 5 years. And then they went for something much more kind of a little less personality, we'll say, a little more pared back. But when I read about this, where I was reading from said that they changed the design to make the logo in line with football heraldry rules. And I did not realize that there were rules. I have not found these rules anywhere. I don't know who made these rules.
So explain what like football heraldry.
So that's like when you see the shield and something that looks more medieval almost, or like crest-like. So yeah, I'm going to have to dig deeper to see if I can find the rules.
Well, I wonder if those were rules within Europe or within...
It was 1950, so...
Yugoslavia maybe? Or
maybe. I don't know.
That's interesting.
But the new design, and there are 4 versions of this, the same basic design that they went through from 1950 to 95. And it's a simple triangular shield shape, which is called the heater shape. Fun fact, because it looks like an iron.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. With a red star placed in its center, the shield is cut in half diagonally to be white on top and red on the bottom. With the red, I said in half, but it's taking up about 2/3 of the space. The star is outlined to break it apart from the solid background, and there are several versions of this. It's in different ones, outlined in gold and in white. In the upper left, there are bold letters in Cyrillic that look like an OK, but the O is actually the symbol closest to F, so it's football club. Okay. And in the version that's the most recent, the longest lasting, the shield is outlined in gold. There's like a little white space and then a gold stroke around the outside.
This to me looks like just the most basic, generic, communist type logo. It's just red and white, diagonal through the crest, the center star, the Cyrillic. And it just is like,
think of a team called Red Star.
This is
it.
Or like a fake Russian beer logo. I mean, it just, I know I keep saying Russian, but like communist.
It is. It's heavily influenced by that visual culture. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that stayed pretty much it for a long time.
Yeah, that was basic. That basic design was 50 to 95. And this was the crest that they actually had their like biggest moments ever with. This is the badge they went to with the 1991 European Cup final.
Ooh.
And they won that game, and they won the International Cup final that year in 1991.
Wow.
And then, of course, all hell breaks loose in the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah, literally.
So things change. Things aren't as going as well on the soccer scene, understandably so.
More important things going on.
More important things going on. And the crest changes really for the first time since that beginning spaceman from the 40s. And this is tough because this is definitely a reaction to the politics.
Yeah.
They shrink the shield down and place it inside of a larger circle. And the background colors now, there's the red star shield from before, but now it's laid on top of
not quite a circle. It's like a squished circle.
It's squished. It's not quite a circle. Good eye.
Yeah. What would you call that? Like
an oval?
But it's not even. Yeah, it's kind of like a bottom heavy oval, I would say.
This isn't a very strong design, but they basically added the colors of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia flag.
Yes.
As a statement.
Mm-hmm. And what is that statement? We're part of the Socialist Republic.
All of you people leaving the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, oh, look at us.
Weird. Yeah.
Shame on you. So
it's blue on the left.
Blue on the left.
Red
on the right side, there's red and white stripes, and there's 5 of each. And then on the outside, there's a stroke of another blue stripe encirculating everything.
I don't know about the politics of the change, but I actually find it more engaging. In like the shield just with the star in it works better without the Cyrillic OK letters within it.
Oh yeah, the OK is now on top. It's in the circle. It's not in the shield.
It oddly could be mistaken for a U.S. badge.
Yes, it's very. It looks very, 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 very American.
Yeah,
it would fit, except for the OK.
Except for the complete history.
And also, you know what? Also, there was a version of this that had Latin letters, FK for football club.
Yeah.
So that looks maybe a little bit more
closer
to what could be construed as a U.S.
And then they
flag.
Didn't keep that for too long, did they?
No, that was the 2 versions of that were 95 to 2010. Mm-hmm. And then they went back to the original, but they've added stars for 30 plus League Cup wins. So now they have 3 stars. Yeah, that not much changed. I'm not surprised that they went back, considering all of the politics, the current politics, and the use of this as like a symbol for Serbian pride. I'm not surprised they kept it.
Yeah, they kept it longer than than Yugoslavia existed.
Yeah.
And that's similar to even the name of the league persisted for after the fall part. It was still the Yugoslavian. I forget. But I can understand. I mean, I can understand. I can't really understand like the amount of turmoil involved in all of that. And then because at some point there's someone here trying to just run a club. Right?
Yeah, somebody's trying to play soccer.
With all the communist imagery and all of the social layers, and it is still an organization that needs to make money, and so like trying to navigate that and still try to compete in Europe and still. So I feel bad for that intern. I just really, that's
copied and pasted. They're like
a lot of stuff to carry. That's a lot of stuff to carry. Okay.
Oh no. Yeah.
You want me to do what? Okay.
And
So they returned to basically their original.
they
with
returned
the
to the
stars,
original.
and they've changed the size a little bit of it. and-
Yeah, they've just made slight adjustments. So, it's a pretty it's not as many like swings back and forth as other clubs.
Yeah, it's not like Juventus where there's just
No.
wild. Looking at them, I think that none of these are like great. And I think that they're, although within the Serbian SuperLiga, I did see some interesting crests, but there's so little information in our extent, and the amount of research we could do, so little information on those clubs. Didn't feel like we could have a discussion, but like FK Rad, I don't know if you saw that one. It's a circular one, and it almost looks like a thumb is in the middle of it or something, like the outline of a thumb.
I think in order to make this research complete, we just both need to become fluent in Serbian.
No, pass. And then
that's where the information lies.
And what was the other one? There was another one that was really interesting, but I couldn't find too much great information about the club, and that would be FK Mladost, I would say, Mladost. Like has a very ornate lettering. It's blue and white.
I remember some very striking green ones.
Yeah, if I did have to choose from these Red Star, I actually, while I love the straight, idealistic, I don't love, but I find interesting the original crest. But the one immediately after that, where the shape of their shield was more diamond shape, I think is interesting. Before it was kind of a more rounded out shape.
I think the one with the gold lettering and the gold outline star, where I'm looking at, was in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
It was a little softer and rounder. Are we looking at the same one?
I'm looking, I think, the first one right after the initial, where it's actually sharper, more
yes, very sharp.
shape.
I like the one right after that.
Okay, well, you're wrong.
Oh,
Okay.
you're wrong.
Well, this is a very interesting...
The one I like looks like puff paint.
This is a similar, in ways, there's some similarities between our two clubs. Obviously, because of shared history.
They're also arch rivals.
They are arch rivals because they're the two best teams, and they're both in Belgrade. So Partizan Belgrade is the club that I was looking at their crest. A little history about this club. They were actually formed by the army in 1945, and the club is named in honor of the Partisans, the group that were, as they often say, were the anti-fascist group. And that's actually the group led by Tito, that helped him rise to fame within the country. So very tied in with the military. The club is a huge multi-sport club.
Oh, same with Red Star.
So it's very much this European. Yeah. They have basketball, they have gymnastics, they have esports. So it's a huge enterprise from chess to water polo. I was really surprised to find that Partizan has one of the top youth development academies in Europe.
Oh.
And a lot of the Serbian players that are all over Europe, and they do play all over Europe and the world, have come through that system. They are nicknamed the Steamrollers after their dominance in the 1964-65 season, when it kind of coincided with their golden generation of players and the way in which they were steamrolling other teams. That nickname is stuck. Their farthest European competition was in 1966 when they were in the European Cup final against Real Madrid. They have appeared in the Champions League and are regular participants in the Europa League competition. So there's a lot of history there.
That's similar to Red Star.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because they're the two top dogs.
60s, early 70s.
Yeah. I found
things started to fall apart. Yeah.
I found this chart. Might be derailing us here. But this is the UEFA ranking for Red Star.
Oh, yeah. There's a little bit of a drop off.
They're right at 92, 93. They were right at the top, and then bam.
But it's amazing how much they've climbed in the last decade.
Yeah, you can really learn a lot about a place by just looking at their UEFA ranking chart.
So again, similar to Red Star, there was only really one big jump in the design of their crests. And then there were just variations on the second one. And so their first one was adopted a crest with a blue disc with a yellow border and had a red 5-pointed star in the middle, which symbolized communism. And contained within that was the abbreviation JA, which stands for the Yugoslav Army. So that, there's
Very direct.
Not a lot of
a little more direct than the Red Star's first one.
Yeah, all it's missing is the androgynous space figure. To someone not in the know, it just looks like it says, yeah. It's like, yes,
yeah, it's like
I'm
cute.
so happy. But I mean, again, this is like the stereotypical communist emblem.
Mm-hmm.
The blue, the red star with the gold outline. And if you look at their kits from the time, it was very large on their kits.
Oh.
So, I would say a normal crest was like 3 inches across. These seemed like they were like 5 to 6 inches. So it was like, we are the army, we are communist, and we play soccer or football or whatever it is. And so that was the case from 1945 when they were founded until 1947. And at that point, it underwent a change. It still incorporated the original styles, but it was, I would say, a fairly dramatic change.
Sure.
Yeah. So the central circle now became white, still with a red pointed star in it. It's now surrounded by a larger blue circle in which the words the Yugoslav Army were written. So they got rid of the JA. Now it's just written. And both circles are bordered by a yellow circle that has a green wreath over it. At the top and bottom of the emblem, there's a shield with red and white lines. At the bottom of the emblem was a shield with red and white lines, and at the top were 5 torches representing one of the 5 nations of Yugoslavia, so Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Macedonians, and Montenegrins. So this is all a clear reference to the national emblem of Yugoslavia. So similar, again, to that adaptation of the Red Star, bringing in the Yugoslav national imagery. And that form, one or the other, is really the basis for what's today, but it did go through 4 other iterations. So in 1950 it changed, and in that change, Partisan was separated from the Yugoslav Army, and for the first time the team's name was written in Cyrillic and Latin alphabets on either side of the center circle. So you have that center star in the middle.
Is. Okay.
Yeah, so it's both in Cyrillic and Latin. The inscription of the Yugoslav Army was removed from the crest along with a green wreath and was replaced by the words Sportsko Društvo, Sports Association. Partisan used this emblem until 1958, and it still had the original colors, even though the team had changed its equipment colors to black and white a year before. Interesting story about the equipment colors, because this ties into our episode last week. So there's a story I found in 1957. So they're still, have this colorful logo. The club was on tour in South America and had a friendly with Juventus. A president of Juventus, Umberto Agnelli, donated
Great job.
donated 2 sets of Juventus's black and white jerseys to Partisan. And from that point on, all of a sudden, Partisan was wearing black and white striped jerseys.
So we go
Juventus strikes again.
We go from Notts County, England, to Juventus in Italy.
I think there should be a
Partisan
Juventus tourney, like all the teams that stole Juventus jerseys.
Yeah. Where did Notts County get them from?
Well, I thought they were also.
I know they're the oldest club in association football.
You just wanted to go back.
Did you know?
So then that was its emblem till 1958. But then at that point, to match the uniform, in 58 they dropped almost all the colors. So now it is black and white. With the red star, and then the flame on top is also in red. Other changes at that point. it was, sorry. Oh, right. The only other change is that it no longer says Sports Association. It now says Jugoslovensko Sportsko Društvo, Yugoslav Sports Association. Slightly changed in 1963 when they added a 6 flame to the torch to reflect the change of the official state emblem, which now included 6 torches representing 6 Yugoslav republics instead of the previous 5. And that remained unchanged until the breakup of Yugoslavia. In 1992, they went under, again, a very minimal change with Yugoslavia breaking up. Instead of Jugoslovensko Sportsko Društvo, the word Fudbalski Klub, football club, were inserted, and the crest remains as it is to this day.
Ever since 92.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the fonts and the size has just changed slightly, but the crest they have today is the same since it's been 1958. So while the first crest we mentioned was very much kind of a stereotype of what you would imagine a Soviet emblem, I would say that's true about the others as well, except these would they look more like they would be on a colonel's or admiral's lapel.
Yeah.
With the star very central. And it's almost like the one since 1958. The black and red, to me, it's almost like it is so stereotypical of kind of socialist design, propagandistic design. I could see it on vodka labels. I could see it on, it just is, it is that.
It has a
That's what it
very
is.
sharp vibe that the ones with colors don't have as much.
Now, there is an unofficial crest of the club that's called the shovel.
The shovel.
Yeah. And I was not able to see exactly what that is, but I think it takes from the stripes at the bottom of the crest.
I think I read that as well.
And I think it's associated with the supporters' nickname as the Gravediggers. So that, I think, is something used by supporters, but also starts to be tied in with a little bit of that complicated ultra history.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was surprised by the breadth, the scale of this club, the players that have gone through it. Oh, and I was going to mention, when you were talking, one of the best things about the Red Star Belgrade is that former Chicago Fire star, Alexander Katai, plays for them. Fire, fire, fire. But in looking at these, it made me think about this kind of socialist imagery, because I think both of these are very clearly what you would imagine as propagandistic or communist design. And on the one side, there's a certain appeal to it that's very simple, very graphic.
Yeah,
right?
graphic, sharp, flat.
Yeah, like a lot of the principles of early Russian design was that in order to have a revolution, you have to have a revolution in visual culture as well. And there needs to be a kind of populist approach to design where it's easily readable by all members of society, quickly recognizable and accessible. And that's definitely viewed in these. But when I was thinking about that, I'm like, what else is this familiar to? Why is this else seem similar? It seems very similar to MLS crests. Oh,
well, so like the minimalism of modern crests and the simplicity of old Soviet crests.
I would argue, yeah.
You know,
and kind of the coldness as well. They're very cold.
With partisan, yes.
Yeah.
It looks like an MLS crest.
I could see the Red Star as well. You could not?
No.
I could see a Texas team with that logo.
With the one with the flag, the squishy circle. I think the Red Stars is maybe too simple, or not too simple because it's like the most simplest thing ever. But I don't know, something about it doesn't feel MLS. Maybe it's because I think it's because the partisan is a circle, and the Red Stars is a shield.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that I was surprised. It was interesting to me because I think
because there are heraldry rules.
How dare you?
How dare you break the heraldry rules?
The healthy rules must be observed.
You have a heater shield.
I just find it interesting that the principles of really like communist propaganda dictated the development of a design style that you can't argue its influence. I think it's very influential. The pared down, clean lines graphic, paired with contemporary crest design that is also pared down more for its easy adaptability to reproduction in different forms. I mean, think of the Juventus crest we talked about last week. It's so pared down, so simple. Most. And it also made me think of the art movements in Yugoslavia, where a lot of the nationalist government-sponsored art was cold edge, minimal, abstract, because they wanted to present things that seemed grand, but that they could project any sort of ideology or meaning upon. And how dangerous that can be at times, because it becomes almost unmoored and baseless and can be used without any intention of a creator or of the audience that it's meant to serve. Instead, it's used against them, and it's blank. And there's something very terrifying about symbols and images that represent a culture that are blank, that are empty, because what's really behind there. And so it's stepping back, thinking about relation to contemporary crests in relation to Uber capitalism, I think there starts to be some overlap about that. Maybe I'm going too deep into it.
This is an interesting thesis.
Anyway, what was your take on the Serbian SuperLiga and Red Star Belgrade? Any last thoughts?
I hope they find their way.
Yeah, I think I think that's come through, is that I hope that the better voices find their way, because I think ultra groups exist a lot of places in the world.
Yeah.
I do think they outnumber a lot of other voices, and they're dangerous. It's dangerous. And we often have an idealistic view of sport and competition, but it welcomes instincts or behaviors that can be destructive if they're not checked. So, ooh, what a fun episode. Thank you, Serbia. You're the best. Well, that's it. That's our review of quick overview of Serbian football and
surface.
Two of the clubs there. Well, I thought, it was interesting.
Oh, of course. I mean, surface, as in, like, there's only so much you can do in an hour.
Oh, no, you'd have to dedicate an entire show to what's going on. But it did reiterate my interest in this project, because I did learn quite a bit, and you still find a lot of connections, even with a country and leagues that have gone through so much. There are still a lot of connections with the rest of the footballing world.
Yeah, and the history of football is so tied to the history of the world.
Yeah.
Like, you can't separate anything.
And I couldn't help thinking a lot about Ukraine in this conversation, and all of the Ukrainian clubs that are still trying to operate, and the clubs that were rated for other players that are playing in other countries, and how that's going to form and affect clearly the people, what we hope is still that country, but also the clubs, and the fact that is always going on, and the troubled layers that kind of lay ahead for that. It's yay.
We'll see what happens. Yeah.
But we are moving on. So next week we will be talking about a new country, and it's one I don't know much about.
I've actually had the pleasure of visiting.
Oh my gosh. So we typed into our handy dandy random country generator to choose. And Maria, where will we be exploring the football culture of next week?
We will be traveling to Ecuador, Justin.
Oh, I am so excited. And partially because their national team kits are awesome. So I can only imagine.
We can talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
All right. So Ecuador, we don't know much about it, so we will have to
see you next
see
time.
you next week. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
You're afraid to say that
I'm
now,
afraid
aren't you?
I'm like, this should be interesting no matter what.
All right. So thank you for listening. If you want to find out more about Marie and I's project, the Footy Museum, you can go to thefootymuseum.com, and you can also find past episodes of this podcast there. And if you've made it this far, we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye.